Perth Linux Users Group, talking Linux and open source.
And he's going to be giving us a talk about Bitcoin. Thanks. Welcome, Leah.
Thank you. Sorry to keep you guys waiting.
Sorry, when we do questions afterwards, can you just wait for the microphone? Because it's being streamed and recorded. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, yeah. So this is Bitcoin. The talk about Bitcoin, a decentralized payment system. I'm not sure how much you know about it tonight. I'm going to just give you a bit of an overview about the different things about Bitcoin. So what is Bitcoin? Well, it's the first decentralized digital currency, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, both the protocol and a unit of digital currency, Bitcoin and Bitcoins, an open source transaction system, and it's a system that operates outside of government regulation. So this person called Satoshi Nakamoto released a white paper describing the Bitcoin system around 2008. In January 2009, he then released the source code and the software for the Bitcoin client. And in that time, he mined around 25,000 blocks by himself. I'm not sure of the exact numbers on that. It might be a little bit more or less, but so he holds around about just over 1 million Bitcoins himself. It's probably not his real name. He's released it anonymously. And I think he's either dead or incredibly optimistic about the future of Bitcoin, because those Bitcoins that he's mined by himself have not moved anywhere, even during the bubble last year where the price of Bitcoin soared up to around $32. So how does Bitcoin work? Bitcoins are generated from a process known as Bitcoin mining. There's a finite supply of Bitcoins that will never reach 21 million. The people who run the Bitcoin program are called nodes. They're nodes on the Bitcoin network. And they can either participate in the mining of Bitcoins and make transactions. They don't have to do both. They can if they want to, but you can also just make transactions. You don't have to mine to make transactions. Every transaction is publicly broadcasted into what's called a block of transactions. And this forms the blockchain, the blocks. And as I briefly mentioned before, I think it's open source. So anybody can review the code, make sure that it's legitimate, and it's decentralized, so there's no single point of failure. 3 pillars of Bitcoin, at the moment as far as I can tell, are drugs, gambling, and speculation. So I'll just go through each of these. The Silk Road is the predominant place where drugs are traded on the internet. And the users stay anonymous by running Tor and in-house Bitcoin mixing service that Silk Road uses. So it mixes the Bitcoins around with other Bitcoins so that you can't tell that any one Bitcoin transaction was made simply. It just obfuscates the the transactions, making it a lot harder to track. And it uses a feedback system like eBay does. And from a recent report done, this guy saw that it was about 98% positive reviews. So although there is scamming that goes on in that marketplace, a lot of fraud, the majority of those transactions look like successful transactions. And using the feedback reviews, that researcher compiled a report where it was estimated sales of $22 million in the last year, and which that equates to around a daily profit of $6,000 a day for the person or people running that site. So online gambling in its current state mainly relies on, or mainly uses closed source software for the online casinos, and people have to trust that the people running those sites are not like tampering with the fairness of the game, like flicking the "I win all your money" switch whenever they feel like it. And the traditional online casinos often rely on independent review websites to get their trusted status from their users. In contrast, Bitcoin gambling sites give you proof that their systems are operating in a fair, random way, and that provability is given through basically through the practices of cryptography, and I'm not going to go into that a lot because it's fairly technical and a bit above my expertise, but it does remove the need to trust third-party review websites when you can prove it yourself. And so it puts the trust in cryptography, math, science, that kind of stuff. And some popular Bitcoin gambling sites, BitZeno and Satoshi Dice. The third pillar, speculation. The price spike that occurred last year was all because of speculation. It was a bubble. Too many people were just investing in Bitcoin for the sake of selling it later, hopefully for a higher price. And it only worked up until a certain point when people realized that there was not a lot of inherent value in the Bitcoin system compared to the price that it was trading for. Price is just a function of supply and demand. And a lot of Bitcoin miners made money in the last 3 years with the price of Bitcoin going up. But I personally think that the Bitcoin will go a lot higher. The price of Bitcoin will go a lot higher. And I think we'll see a lot more speculation. Bitcoin's a new technology. It's the combination of a variety of computer security and networking technologies, namely Hashcash, which was a proof of work system where you had to do a bit of work with your computer before you could send an email. And this helped to reduce spam, because if somebody wanted to send thousands of emails, they'd have to do the computational work to send out those emails. So that's proof of work. I'll talk a bit more about that later. B-Money, which was made by this guy called Wei Dai. And that was very similar to Bitcoin in some respects. It took out the centralization of digital money, and basically had certain servers assigned with the authority for producing the digital cash and authorizing transactions. But it was still not distributed enough in the way that Bitcoin is now, and for that reason it didn't really gain a lot of traction. And peer-to-peer, which is obviously a very proven technology, with BitTorrent being unstoppable as it is. So Bitcoin uses that technology as well. It's still officially experimental software, and it's in beta. The current version is 0.6.3, 0.6.3, and the release candidate for 0.7 is out now and still being tested. The uses are still being worked on, and there are new technologies emerging that use the same Bitcoin-like protocol to prevent fraud. These technologies are, well, the main one I'm following is called Namecoin. It's a distributed DNS server. That's kind of a bit off topic, so I'm not going to talk any more about that. But I'll talk a bit more about how the Bitcoin protocol works in the coming slides. And it's money that works well for the internet. It's 24 hours, 365 days. So that's a good thing for new technology. And the first and most popular cryptocurrency. There's other kind of copycat Bitcoin currencies. One's called Litecoin. The differences are it's harder to mine, but I really don't see the purpose for making something harder just for the sake of that. But anyway, it's another off-topic thing. The advantages of Bitcoin: the fees are very low. Merchants don't pay fees to accept Bitcoins, so they can pass on any savings, offering lower prices. There's no risk of chargebacks to the merchants, unlike credit cards or PayPal. Consumers have substantially more privacy when shopping online. There's a finite amount of Bitcoin, meaning it works better than other systems available. And so the price will probably go up. It's good for people who have Bitcoin. Bit of an early adopter advantage there, but and it's open source, transparent, no inflation, because limited amount, finite amount, and it provides a niche market for techies. Some of the disadvantages: consumers don't have any protection if the deal goes sour, or if their computer gets hacked, someone can steal all their Bitcoins, and there's no legal recourse for that. Once they're gone, they're gone. There is hardly anyone who accepts Bitcoin in payment for anything. About 99% of the people I've spoken to have never heard about Bitcoin. The accepted price is very heavily dependent on the Mt. Gox exchange price. Mt. Gox is the biggest exchange for Bitcoin, where you can trade Bitcoins for dollars, dollars for Bitcoins, euros, all those currencies. It's about 16 currencies. It makes accounting and tax time more complicated, because you have to work out what the Bitcoins were worth at the time when you made the sale, and if you haven't sold them, then you have to work out capital gains on that. I still haven't done my tax. The market is small and the price is volatile and open to market manipulation. So need to think about that. If you're going to take a business into Bitcoin, it's still very small, and it might be better to wait it out. So there's no chargebacks with Bitcoin. It's one of the main advantages for the merchants. Caveat emptor is Latin for let the buyer beware. It's the main principle for buying property. You need to do your due diligence to make sure that there are no defects in the property you're buying. Same thing kind of applies to Bitcoin. You've got to do your due diligence, make sure that the thing you're buying has had a good track record of being delivered, that the merchant's honest, all that stuff. There's a bit of a legal battle going on between TradeHill which used to be the second largest Bitcoin exchange and based in Australia, or I think that's right, and Jolla, who is the US payment processor. What happened was TradeHill was getting a lot of volume through Jolla customers, and it turned out a lot of those transactions were fraudulently made, and so Jolla then reversed a lot of those transactions. And of course, Bitcoin, there's no mechanism for doing that, so TradeHill lost about 100 grand due to the fraud. And I want to go a bit into the details here. Jolla had on their website that there was no risk for chargebacks using their service, so TradeHill relied on that advice. But of course, well, actually, Jolla then took off that thing and changed their terms and conditions, which I think is a bit fraudulent. But anyway, so Jolla's claiming that TradeHill were dealing in fraudulent practices and Bitcoin was a fraudulent currency. And so yeah, that's going to be a thing to watch. I think TradeHill are suing them for $2 million. For they lost the Bitcoin domain as well. So the chargebacks, I've said before, is a feature for merchants, a hurdle for customers. The drive for using Bitcoins in the future, I think, will not be the consumer, but it will be the merchants who don't want chargebacks and they don't want to pay high fees or monthly fees to accept credit cards. So who uses Bitcoin? IT specialists who know how Bitcoin works. They know that it's a pretty solid system in terms of security. People who want complete control over their money. Early adopters of technology. Market traders. Online shopping businesses, and all in all, a global community of interested people. Why do Bitcoins have value? The system never sleeps. The transactions are processed roughly every 10 minutes. Fees are more competitive. They are practically impossible to counterfeit. There is proof of work in every Bitcoin. Their supply is predictably released, not like central bank issued money. Global market, there's a global market for people to sell anything using a unified virtual currency, which takes a lot of the headache out of dealing with converting different currencies and working with a fee structure in the credit card system. So Bitcoin has yet to be legally recognized anywhere as money. It transcends national laws, making regulation difficult. There is no legally recognized or legal category that Bitcoin fits into. It's still being debated. Is it a virtual currency, a commodity, asset, security, barter, or token, digital token? Just recently, a US political candidate recently started accepting donations in the form of Bitcoin. Not anonymous donations, it's worth pointing out there. He required all the people wanting to donate using Bitcoin to supply him with their address and email address and ID, basically. And Bitcoin is legal because it's a system that keeps a secure log of transactions. The law will probably concentrate more on the points of exchange for Bitcoin where they're converted to government currency. these Bitcoin exchanges, Mt. Gox is by far the largest, handling nearly 90% of the US dollar market, and offers 16 currencies trading with Bitcoin. Followed by BTCE, who's about 4% of the market for US dollars. There's many exchanges. One of them just got hacked recently, Bitfloor. They lost about, I think it's, how much? Yeah, I think it's about $100,000 worth, about 10,000 Bitcoins. I'm not sure about that, but it was a large amount of money. Somebody got access to an unencrypted backup of the Bitcoin wallet. I mean, in the last year, I think there's been 10 heists totaling around 260,000 Bitcoins. At current market rate, that's worth about $2.5 million. So security is definitely one of the biggest areas that Bitcoin exchanges need to focus on getting right. And regulations are important to stop money laundering and arms dealing. The main thing to keep track of in dealing with Bitcoins is people's ID, because although it's touted as an anonymous currency, it's really more useful when it works with people's identities, I think, so that we can stop bad things like money laundering and arms trade. So I just mentioned anonymity. Anonymity. Bitcoin has anonymous properties in the system. Like, when you sign up for Bitcoin, you don't have to give away your ID. You don't have to give your email address, your name, anything. When you make transactions, over the course of your making transactions, the Bitcoin gets kind of mixed up a bit in your Bitcoin wallet with the other transactions. So if I donate some Bitcoins to WikiLeaks, say, and then I make other payments to other people, they could probably see in the future that I had made donations to WikiLeaks address if that WikiLeaks address was made public, which in some cases it has. Because of this, Bitcoin is supposed to be used like you make a new address for each payment that you receive. That's just kind of like a standard security Bitcoin practice, so that if you use the same address for every transaction, then every single person who you receive money from can see how many Bitcoins you have, which is bad. Like, say you donated, say you were accepting donations, and you get $100,000, and then you do another deal, and then you get a payment for I'm trying to recite something I've read and I'm just not remembering it, so sorry about that. I'm just not going to explain that. Strong anonymity is not a prominent design in Bitcoin. In the design of it's not a design goal of the Bitcoin system. Bitcoin transactions can be associated with an IP address. Say if you're listening for Bitcoin transactions on the network, you can see people's IP addresses when they make a transaction. All Bitcoin transactions are broadcasted publicly and logged. That's not to say that the IP address of every single transaction is available historically. It's only if somebody's actively listening to those transactions that IP address can be associated with a Bitcoin address. and the Bitcoin trail can be further obfuscated with mixing services, as Silk Roads does. If you wanted to make your Bitcoins look obfuscated, you would just send them to Silk Road and then withdraw them back, and it would make the trail a bit harder to follow for anyone who wanted to see what you're doing with those Bitcoins. New feature in the next version of Bitcoin is that it can be more easier to integrate with Tor. And I want to cover some points about money laundering with Bitcoin. Bitcoin doesn't have a huge amount of liquidity in the market. It's currently around 110 million in market capital. And Bitcoin is traceable. Transactions are publicly broadcasted and permanently stored on the Bitcoin blockchain, which would be a deterrent for long-term criminals, because as soon as one transaction's done, it's available for public scrutiny for forever after that. Mt. Gox has the biggest Bitcoins for dollars exchange, is the biggest Bitcoins for dollars exchange, and they strictly follow the Know Your Customer anti-money laundering regulations, and they check all their IDs with for any kind of photoshopping. They're pretty strict about it, and any kind of large amounts of money moving into there, it's going to be pretty heavily scrutinized. And last thing I want to say about that with Bitcoin is relatively anonymous compared to the regular bank system. But the exchanging of dollars for Bitcoins reduces the anonymity, and that leaves a paper to Bitcoin trail, which you've converted back to cash. You can, as long as the ID checks are in place, there's always going to be pretty low amounts of anonymity, which should be, I think, a big enough deterrent for serious criminals considering using Bitcoin. And I just wanted to compare this scenario with what happened with the banks recently. You might have heard of the recent news about HSBC Bank, who were hit with $27.5 million fee for non-compliance with the anti-money laundering regulations. The US Senate reported that between 2007 and 2008, HSBC's Mexican operations moved $7 billion into the bank's US operations. All of this costs money, black money, used probably from drug trade or worse. And the more shocking story is the story of Wachovia, who was, that's a bank. I think it was based in, I'm pretty sure it was based in America. I don't know exactly where, I can't remember right now. But it failed to apply proper anti-money laundering restrictions to the transfer of nearly $400 billion of drug money. And what's shocking about that is that the fine was less than 2% of the bank's $12 billion profit. So, I mean, money laundering is a serious issue, and I think, as it stands, the banks will probably need to concentrate more on that than anything to do with Bitcoin, given its very low volume in comparison to the kind of money that needs to be moved in those markets. So the future's looking pretty bright for Bitcoin. In about the next 6 weeks, there will be a Bitcoin MasterCard being released by BitInstant with, I'm assuming, a lot cheaper fees than current credit cards. You can sign up for one at BitInstant if you want your Bitcoin MasterCard. Cash deposits are going to become ubiquitous. I read somewhere, can't quite remember where, but I think around Australia, you're going to be able to buy Bitcoins at any Australia Post outlet. But obviously they're going to do ID checks, which is a good thing. Keep the criminals out of the system. There'll be more services and goods that will pop up from people wanting Bitcoins. I think this is probably a given if the price of Bitcoin remains stable or trends upwards, which it has been doing. Online services built on Bitcoin will become more prevalent. There's a processor called BitPay. They offer a service where they convert your Bitcoins to dollars. You can, or just, yeah, Bitcoins to dollars. You can choose a percentage of if you want to keep some of the payment in Bitcoin and some of it in dollars. And I think there will be more integration for shopping cart services. I mean, I've already seen they've released some plugins for ZenCart, OpenCart, Magento. I admittedly could only get something working in ZenCart and OpenCart. But I'm pretty sure those will be more developed in the future. And hopefully we'll see some kind of a real-time Bitcoin-denominated price widgety thing that you can put in the shopping cart, so you can have the prices displayed maybe in US dollars, but which changes according, sorry, you can set the price in US dollars and the Bitcoin price will change according to whatever the dollar to Bitcoin price is. As it's pretty volatile, it'd be good if we could have some stability around the Bitcoin price. I mean, the problem in the past was people would say, I'm going to sell this for 10 Bitcoins, which at the time was worth $5, and then the Bitcoin price skyrockets up, and then it looks like it's being sold for $50. So hopefully we'll see some more stableness there. And I think as Bitcoin can be used as a honeypot for money launderers and drug dealers, less criminals will use it. I mean, there's always a Bitcoin trail. It can end up being very long, but inevitably I think criminals will be caught. And that will add a sense of legitimacy, I think, to the currency. At the moment, people think it's just for people who want to launder money and drugs. So just go a bit into the technical aspects of Bitcoin. The Bitcoin blockchain is a transaction database shared by all nodes participating in a system based on the Bitcoin protocol. A full copy of the currency's blockchain consists of every single transaction ever executed. The blockchain is comprised of blocks, which are comprised of transactions. And new blocks are added to that blockchain about once every 10 minutes. It can be sooner, it can be longer. It all depends on certain criteria, which I'll talk about soon. But before I do that, I want to just give a brief kind of overview about cryptography. It's just one slide, so don't worry. Cryptos comes from I conceal, and graphy is like, or graph, write. So I conceal what I write, literally what it means. And it's the practice and study of techniques for secure communication. Public key cryptography solves the problem of securely establishing a secret key between two people over the internet. The public key and the private key are two different mathematically related keys. And going away from the public key kind of explanation, I want to talk about hash function, because that's important to understand how Bitcoin works. A cryptographic hash function is it's a function that takes some data of any length as an input and outputs a short fixed length hash, which could be used in, for example, a digital signature. So here's the easy explanation for what Bitcoin mining is. It's a process trying to find a difficult math problem, and when the answer is found, a subsidy of Bitcoins, which is currently 50 Bitcoins, are rewarded along with any of the transaction fees. Bitcoin miners compete with each other in a random lottery. The more computing power someone is contributing to the Bitcoin network, the higher probability they have of winning the lottery draw for the 50 Bitcoins. Bitcoin miners solidify the real-time transactions that are happening into these blocks that are then put into the blockchain. And there's two kinds of transactions that exist. The regular kind, where I send some Bitcoins to someone else, and Coinbase transaction, which is that 50 Bitcoin subsidy and where the supply of Bitcoins comes from originally. So now we go into the bit more technical explanation. That difficult math problem that Bitcoin mining is supposed to solve is the problem of finding that hash, a certain hash, which is lower than the set target. Just think of the set target as a variable for now. Of a block header of the block, which is linked via a Merkle root hash, like a hash tree of the, it's linked via a Merkle root hash to the block body, which contains the unconfirmed real-time transactions, a timestamp, the previous block hash, and a sequentially incremented number, otherwise known as a nonce. And so that set target is a 256-bit number, very large number, that is used in determining how difficult the mining hashing process should be. And the difficulty is adjusted every 2016 blocks, which equates to around once every 2 weeks. The difficulty changes are there to make sure that the supply of Bitcoins are released at a predictable rate. Working out a block of transactions takes the same amount of computing effort, no matter if a block has 1 or 10,000 or 1,000 even transactions. Proofs of work are used in Bitcoin for block generation. The supply of Bitcoins, that 50 Bitcoin subsidy that I pointed to before, is halved every 4 years. And Bitcoins is about 3 years old now, nearly 4 years. At the end of this year, we're approaching the first halving of the block rate. So the miners are all going to get half as many Bitcoins as they're getting now. It's a pretty scary thought for them. It's estimated it's going to happen around end of November or beginning of December. Here's a chart. Shows the supply of Bitcoins. Unfortunately, the years got cut off there. But anyway, so total coins.
How many years is on each horizontal division?
In millions, 3 million, 6 million, 9 million.
Horizontal x-axis.
Oh, sorry. The horizontal x-axis is just the time. So in years, yep. So
Each one of those horizontal clicks is a year, is it?
that's right.
Cool.
Yep. So the first line's 2010, and the second line's 2011. Sorry. Sorry. Line 0 is 2009. Line 1 is 2010. Line 2 is 2011. And line 3 is 2012. So you can see we've at the end of 2012, we've nearly, or we're sitting at around 10 million Bitcoins in circulation. And yeah, so we'll eventually go to 21, but we'll never actually get to 21 million Bitcoins. I think it's going to be about the year 2140 by the time we get to close to 21 million. It's not actually a strictly a halving every 4 years. It's more of a right-wise bitwise shift. You guys probably know more about that than me, but it does that. Sorry?
Shift one bit to the right, so eventually you'll reach 0.
Yeah. Shift 1 bit to the right, so eventually it reaches 0. And it gets rounded down. And Bitcoin's at the moment 8 decimal places, but that's not set in stone. If the developers change it to have another decimal place, and everybody who's mining Bitcoin at the time agrees and decides to update the software, then we'll be able to have more decimal places. That kind of works as like a weapon against deflation. If Bitcoin becomes worth lots of money, then they can just add more decimal places to trade less Bitcoins. I'll just talk a bit about proof of work here. It's a piece of data which was difficult, costly, and time-consuming to produce so as to satisfy certain requirements. Proofs of work are used in Bitcoin for block generation. For blocks to be accepted by the network, proofs of work that are tied to the data of each block are required. So this blockchain is like a string of blocks that each block has proof in it that it's linked to the previous block. So because of this, changing a block in history, which is obviously a bad thing for the integrity of the chain, so changing a block in the history, which can only be done by making a new block containing the same predecessor block, requires regenerating all successors and redoing all the work that they contain. And so you can't go back in history and change a block, because you'd have to, in order to get back to the normal block, which everyone is up to, you'd have to have more computing power than everyone else, which is just not feasible for anyone. Bitcoin mining equipment, in the old days, 2009, people used CPUs, computer processors, the processing power of a computer, to mine for Bitcoins. And the mining was found to be more effective when they use the processing power of the graphics card. Then FPGAs, field programmable gate arrays, were found to be more economical for hash per joule. not as efficient as a graphics card. They run a lot slower and they don't produce as many bitcoins, but the bitcoins they do produce more energy efficient. And right now, ASICs, application specific integrated circuit, I think it is. Yep. Being developed right now and scheduled for release in approximately 1 month. And that's just going to obliterate everybody else who's mining. By the way, like FPGAs, graphics cards are just going to become worthless as far as Bitcoin mining is concerned. CPU mining is already completely a non-player in that market. Here's a chart of the difficulty. Again, the years seem to be cut off, but at the very start, it's October 2011, and it goes up by month, all the way up to October. The very last line on the right axis is October this year. And then you can see the next difficulty is estimated to be just under 100,000 more difficult. And that difficulty is related to that set target I was talking about before, where the more difficult it is, the lower that set target is, which basically makes finding the hash more difficult. Here's a graph of the number of transactions per day. Going from January 9, 0 transactions, to July 12. We're around 40 or 50,000 transactions a day, so there's a lot of transactions happening at the moment. Here's a graph of the Bitcoin network hash rate, which is basically a measurement of how much computing power is being used to mine and generate these Bitcoins. And it looks like I haven't done a very good job on the axis there either. But you can see it's gone up. Sorry about that. You can go to the source blockchain.info to have a better look at these graphs. Same things happened here. This is Bitcoin miners' operating margin, because the price of Bitcoin right now is around $11. So it's very profitable for the Bitcoin miners at the moment. Maybe not so next month when the ASICs come out. Another chart, Bitcoin miners' revenue. That one's got the axes on it. It's pretty good. And that brings me to the end of the presentation. Thank you. If you've got any questions.
Leo,
Hey.
am I on? Leo, how many Bitcoins have you mined?
I've mined, I actually haven't kept a very close eye on this, but I've been mining Bitcoin since last year. At the peak of the bubble, I bought hardware to start mining. I estimate I might have mined maybe, well, I've been mining about 1 Bitcoin a day on average. Now it's not, it's more like 1 Bitcoin every 2 days. So 365 times 1 Bitcoin a day, roughly around 300, well, it's a bit more than a year, so maybe 500 Bitcoins.
So in today's prices, you've come up with about $3,000 worth of electronic currency out of nothing other than effectively electricity and a bit of know-how. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I've invested in 2 state-of-the-art graphics cards at the time. They were state-of-the-art. Now the newer ones come out at a cost of about $2,400, and yeah, mined about about $3,000 worth of Bitcoin, because the price was a lot lower about 6 months ago. It was about less than half of what it is now. And about 4 months ago, I bought some FPGAs. They're probably still paying themselves off, but I think they might have reached maybe 1/3 of their cost. Yeah.
Maybe this is just a lack of understanding on my part, but
I'm sorry?
Since it's a node-based network, and the number of transactions is increasing for each Bitcoin, does this mean that I guess the computational overhead for just running the Bitcoin client is going to increase significantly over time?
Sorry, I'm a bit confused about the question. Could you repeat it again?
Okay, so my understanding is that the clients are also managing, I guess, the integrity and history for each Bitcoin. Oh, much closer. Yep.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, so each Bitcoin is being managed by a node-based network, and so is the computational overhead just to be a node in that network going to increase significantly with time? Like even if you're not mining, if you're simply participating, it seems like that might run away potentially if
Okay,
Bitcoin
so you're
becomes
asking
popular?
if you're not contributing your computer to the mining network, then will that become a burden to the miners? Is that what you're asking?
More like, will it become a burden on your own processing power, essentially?
Okay. Well, the short answer is no. If you're using Bitcoin, you don't have to mine. I mean, if you're mining Bitcoins, the answer is yes. It's going to become a significant burden on your computer.
So it's only the mining computers that actually contribute to the network, so to speak?
Yeah.
Okay.
On a technical kind of generating the currency, processing the way the transactions work, it is a burdensome. It's the proof of work thing. It has to be expensive and time consuming, and so yeah, it uses up a lot of their computer power.
Okay.
So you can't play games and mine Bitcoins at the same time.
Well, yeah, I thought that the clients actually maintained the network even without mining.
No, that's
Obviously
not right
the
at all.
case. Yeah.
You don't need to contribute your power to get the
Yeah.
benefit of using
Okay.
Bitcoin as a currency. No.
Cool. Anyone else?
On a related note, since the entire back history of every transaction is stored in the network, would we ever reach a point where there is not enough storage space for the entire back history?
Yeah.
If far more transactions than there are currently, every miner can't hold them. Do you reckon that would ever happen?
That's a
Or has it
very,
changed?
very valid concern. Well, yes, it could happen, but the developers are pretty smart people. They're working on scalability issues like that, because obviously at the current count of transactions, it's like 3 gigabytes just to download the blockchain. But what we're seeing as well is services that offer kind of like a checkpoint where they host the blockchain, and then you just download from their server whatever transactions you need, and they maintain the back end. So yeah, more services that cut out the blockchain and make it easier, less intensive. Like there's a client on the phone which you don't have to download the whole chain. You can still use Bitcoin's transactions.
Okay, so we'd never reach a point where the network itself can't cope with the volume of transactions out there.
No, it's pretty much, it comes down to storage. There's always going to be more storage in the future at the rate of...
Let us hope the Moore's law holds for it then.
Oh, sorry?
Let us hope the Moore's law holds for storage as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, exactly.
You said that Bitcoins reached a value of like $30 last year.
That's right.
Are you able to divide a Bitcoin into give someone half a Bitcoin and stuff?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Bitcoins are designed to be broken down at the moment into 8 decimal places. So you can send, if you really wanted to, you could send someone 0.000 whatever 7 zeros and 1 Bitcoin. If you really want to send that small amount of money to somebody, you could do that. But having said that, there's a bit of fees built into the transaction network so that people don't abuse that and spam the whole transaction blockchain. So every transaction at the moment, there's a kind of minimum fee built in, 0.005 Bitcoins. So
Okay, one other question, Martin.
sure.
You're saying that there's all this thing of no chargebacks and everything, but I
That's right.
imagine if you're a retailer or something, you've still got to deal with the law. I mean, like, if I buy something off an Australian website with bitcoins and product isn't as described, then I'm entitled to a refund whether it's supported by the currency or not. So
Yeah, that's right.
How-
That's law.
is this
It's kind of like in contrast to Bitcoin at the moment, because I mean, given that people are kind of the people who use Bitcoin are kind of have their own ideas about law as well. Basically, that's what it comes down to. So you're right. It is a bit of a problem for the consumer who they can't rely on any mechanism if they get if they have a problem with the thing that they're buying. But yeah, it's a concern that consumers need to consider.
In this case, it's probably covered by under Australian consumer law. If the company does not provide you with a refund or a suitable replacement, they are held liable under the law, and hence that provides the protection. You cannot go out and say, no, I want my money back, I take it, which is what Bitcoin doesn't give you. But there is still a legal protection that the company can be fined by the government. You don't have to worry as much about that.
Yeah, that's a good point. The legal stuff is separate to the money stuff, which we've seen with credit cards. It's kind of all got mixed up. But I mean, another side to that is if you bought something from somebody in another country, the law might not extend very efficiently to get that.
I've got a couple of related questions. Who dictates how many bitcoins drop when you get a subsidy? How is the transaction fee regulated and who collects it? And is there some kind of central Bitcoin authority?
Okay, good questions. The first question, sorry, could I have the first question again, please?
Who regulates how many bitcoins drop when a miner is granted a subsidy?
Yeah. So the software is the Bitcoin software. It's the answer for that. It's hard coded pretty much into the software that these miners are running. That whenever somebody finds the hash below the set target, they get the subsidy of 50 bitcoins. And when the second question was that to do with the drop?
Well, how does that regulate? Because surely someone could use a hex editor to fix that and get 100 bitcoins.
I see what where you're heading there. What regulates that is basically cryptography and the hash function, which ensures that each Bitcoin follows the rules of not cheating. So it's, I mean, if what would happen? I mean, if somebody did fix it so that they give themselves 100 bitcoins when they find the thing, then all the other Bitcoin miners see that his Bitcoin doesn't follow the rules. So what will happen in that case? He will award himself 100 bitcoins, and his block will become an alternate chain from the standard chain, because all the other miners are refusing his blocks. So this guy can keep on mining blocks, but it's not going to be able to come into existence with the standard blockchain, which everyone else is following the rules on, because no split chains can be combined. It follows the rule of the longest chain wins. So I'm
That is actually a good answer. Thank you. And as to the other two questions, who determines the transaction fee and how is that collected?
Yeah, the Bitcoin developers have implemented a transaction fee into the program, which everyone downloads. 0.005 Bitcoins, I think it was. But the reason they've done that is to stop Bitcoin spam, people trying to flood the network with lots of tiny transactions, which would not be a problem in terms of size of the blocks that Bitcoin miners are mining. It'd be a problem more in the bloat of making everyone downloading more transactions and taking up lots of space in their hard drives. So that's why they implement the fee. How they come to that number, I guess it's just consensus amongst themselves. I mean, everybody's allowed to come into the Bitcoin developer chat room and say, I believe this should happen because of these reasons. It's not really a monopolistic kind of central kind of planned thing. It's very peer-to-peer, and it's a lot of the development discussion takes place in IRC.
All right. Well, the last part of that question was, how is the fee collected? Could you just describe where the 0.005 Bitcoins comes out of the transaction and how?
Yeah. When you send Bitcoins, you type in how many you want to send, and then in the preferences for your wallet application, you set, please set my fee to 0.005. And if you set it to higher, then it's more likely it's going to be included into a block.
I'm not sure, but how I think I understand it, both those questions are, so you, the user, are creating a new transaction with a fee in it. And the only thing stopping that being the wrong fee is the miners will check that in the end. Similarly, for the miner, the job that the miner is doing is they're trying to sign a new block, including a speculative transaction of granting themselves an extra 50 Bitcoin. And it's the first one that succeeds in doing so at the given difficulty level, as in signs that with a hash which is sufficiently many zeros in it, will win that round, win that 10 minutes and create the new blockchain, and subsequently all the other miners will then check that, followed the rules as well as anything else.
Yeah, that's a good description what happens.
Well, in that case, you, the person doing the transaction, you've created a new transaction which could have any fee on it, could have a tiny fee or zero fee or a high fee, and other people will check that you followed the rules afterwards. A miner will check that that fee was paid. You could create a transaction that has no fee.
Yeah, that is possible. You can create transactions with no fees, and they're likely to get still picked up in the mining process. But I mean, the fees do go to the miners. That's if that's what you're asking. Where do the fees go? How do they get awarded? It's to the person to the miner who finds the first block. You know how they're every 10 minutes. So the next miner who finds the valid hash that awards them the block, they get 50 Bitcoins and all the transactions in that block of transactions that they process. So it's usually around 51 Bitcoin.
It's a bonus.
It is a bonus, yeah. And it's an incentive which eventually will be the only incentive that Bitcoin miners have once the subsidy becomes not economical. Hopefully by that time the volume of transactions will make it economical for them to continue mining.
So the main impediment to the use of Bitcoin in electronic commerce is that the value has been fluctuating so much in relation to the dollars. Yeah, and you've outlined that in the future that real-time denomination will be possible. Will that value be determined by the largest exchange, or how will it be determined?
Yep, that's the value of Bitcoin is definitely an important thing to come to some kind of consensus with, especially when doing real-world transactions. At the moment, it's just determined by Mt. Gox because they handle so many of the Bitcoin transactions. In the future, I hope to see that there'll be more exchanges and the price won't be so much dependent on one single entity, but more like an index across a number of exchanges. But at the moment, it's just based on Mt. Gox. And I mean, if we get just the functionality into the shopping carts, that it works dynamically with the price changes, I think that would be a good start. Any more questions?
Thanks very much, Leo. It's been a very interesting talk.
Thanks for listening.